Namo Vishnuvadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskadyade Satarane. So today we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge, text number 2. Raja Vidya Rajuyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pravakshavagramam Dharmyam Susukam Kartum Avyam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets, is the purest knowledge because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, is the perfection of religion, is everlasting, and is joyfully performed. I'm not going to read the whole purport, but just part of it. It's the longest purport in the Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada's purport. This chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called the King of Education because it is the essence of all doctrines and philosophies explained before. Among the principal philosophers in India are Gautama, Kanada, Kapila, Yajnavalkya, Sandilya, and Vaishnavarya. And finally, there is Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra. So, there is no dearth of knowledge in the field of philosophy or transcendental knowledge. Now, the Lord says that this 9th chapter is the king of all such knowledge, the essence of all knowledge that can be derived from the study of the Vedas and the different kinds of philosophy. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body. And the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service. Generally, people are not educated in this confidential knowledge. They're educated in external knowledge. As far as ordinary education is concerned, people are involved with so many departments: politics, sociology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, etc. There are so many departments of knowledge all over the world and many huge universities, but there is unfortunately no university or educational institution where the science of the spirit soul is instructed. Yet the soul is the most important part of the body. Without the presence of the soul, the body
Важное, что есть в теле,
still people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul. In the Bhagavad Gita, especially from the 2nd chapter on, stresses the importance of the soul. In the very beginning, the Lord says that this knowledge is imperishable and the soul is not perishable. Antavanta ime deha nityas yokta sharirina. This is a confidential part of knowledge, simply knowing that the soul is different from this body, and that its nature is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. But that gives no positive information about the soul. Sometimes people are under the impression that the soul is different from the body, and that when the body is finished, or when it is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal. But actually, that is not a fact. How can the soul, which is so active within this body, be inactive after being liberated from the body? It is always active. If it is eternal, then it is eternally active. And its activities in the spiritual kingdom are the most confidential part of spiritual knowledge. These activities of the spirit soul are therefore indicated here as constituting the king of all knowledge, the most confidential part of all knowledge. Namo Vishnuvadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskadyade Satarane. it is said that there are 10 billion verses in the Vedas. And of those 10 billion, all of them are all summarized in the Bhagavad Gita in 700 verses. And out of the 700 verses, the middle 6 chapters, from chapter 7 to chapter 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, are the summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita, or the essence of Bhagavad Gita. And of all those chapters, the summary of those chapters is this 9th chapter. And here Krishna will explain the most confidential knowledge. Notice in the beginning of the 2nd chapter, Krishna tells us about confidential knowledge when he says, Denosmi nita dehe kamaram yovanam jara tata dahantara praptir diryas tatra namuyati. That the embodied soul is continually passing a body, which is going from boyhood to youth to old age. So similarly, the soul will pass into another body at the time of death. The self-realized souls are not bewildered by all these different changes. In other words, this is knowledge that even Hiranyakashipu had. After his baby brother, Hiranyaksha, was killed by Lord Varaha, Hiranyakashipu, he explained to his lamenting relatives that actually Hiranyaksha was not killed because the soul is eternal. So even the asuras, they also have knowledge of the eternality of the self. Kamsa understood that he was eternal. Therefore, Narada Muni came to him and he told him that actually in your last lifetime, you were a demon called Kalanimi. And when the demigods and the devotees, the demigods and the asuras were fighting on the shore of the ocean of milk, at that time, Lord Vishnu came riding on the back of the Garuda, and when you threw a trident at him, Lord Vishnu caught that trident, threw it back at you, and killed you. And because you were killed by Vishnu, in this lifetime you became a powerful demon named Kamsa. So even the demons understand, or at least some of the demons know about this confidential knowledge that we're eternal. Now in present society, even the educated people have no idea of the eternality of the soul. As a matter of fact, the more educated one becomes, the less likely it is that one will understand that they're eternal. When Srila Prabhupada was speaking to Professor Kotatsky at the University of Moscow, he tried to explain to him, as he's tried to explain to many other people, that your body's changing, but you yourself are not changing. Still, no matter how much Prabhupada tried to explain it, Professor Kotatsky could not understand. This is knowledge that, generally speaking, even the farmers in India understand. Certainly the warriors, the Kshatriyas fighting in a battlefield, they all understood. As a matter of fact, this was just common knowledge in the Vedic culture. And therefore people were satisfied with their work. Generally speaking, Vedic information deals with that confidential knowledge. As a matter of fact, the Vedic literature, which deals with the mundane world, gradually increases people's faith so that they understand their eternality. Someone who understands the eternality will work to realize the fact that they're eternal. People who don't understand that they're eternal, certainly they're not going to work on the eternal plot for eternal understanding. Therefore, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada advises that in Gurukul, the students should be trained up in two subject matters, astrology and Ayurveda. Because if one understands that astrology, as Prabhupada writes in another part, that every gentleman should understand their past, present, and future. Even Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was in Navadvip, he was going to different merchants, getting donations from them. Because at that time, people used to give donations to brahmanas. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a very famous brahmana in Navadvip. He came to, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to one Brahmin who was an astrologer and asked the astrologer, my dear astrologer, who was I in my last lifetime? So Prabhupada writes that this astrologer was a very special astrologer because he could understand people's past, present, and future simply by meditation. And therefore he, in his meditation, he saw a boar fighting against this huge demon. He also then saw a tortoise with a golden mountain on top of him, of his shell. And the demons and the devotees were churning it, that mountain with Vasuki, a huge serpent, churning the ocean of milk. Then he saw a half man, half lion. And so the Brahmin stopped his meditation and told Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's been a very bad day. I cannot figure out who you are. I'm having so many strange visions. I don't know what to do. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, don't worry about it. Just go back to your meditation. I'm sure you'll figure it out. So the Brahmin began to meditate again. This time he saw a man who was green with bow and arrows shooting at millions of rakshasas. Then he saw Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan. Then he said, oh, now I know who you are. In your last lifetime, you were the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Lord Chaitanya said, no, I think you're wrong. He said, I know who I was in my last lifetime. In my last lifetime, I was a cowherd boy. And because of my pious activities of herding cows, in this lifetime, I've been born as a Brahmin. So Prabhupada writes in one of the purports there that every gentleman should know his past, present, and future. Why? Because if one understands the eternality of the soul, then one's motivation of life will change, or hopefully will change. That's called having another birth. Janmana jayate shudra. By birth, everyone is born as a shudra. Shudra means that one who is absorbed in the Bali concept of life. But samskara bhavat dvija. But by some good association, by some proper understanding, one may have a second birth, that actually I'm eternal. And then Veda, Panta, Bhavat, Vipra. Then one may take to some kind of lifestyle or study so that one can realize one is eternal. The unfortunate situation of modern society is that people have no idea of the eternality of the self, and therefore they're engaged in not ordinary mundane activities, they're engaged in foolish mundane activities. In the Vedic culture, there are mundane activities. As a matter of fact, most of the Vedas deal with mundane activities, but they deal with real knowledge about those mundane activities. As Krishna writes in the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the verses I didn't include, but unkramam tam sitim vapi, punjana vagunanvita, vimudo nanapashanti, pashanti jnana chakshusha. The foolish, they cannot understand how the living entity quits his body or what kind of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But those whose eyes are trained with knowledge can see all this clearly. In other words, the Vedic literature is not simply about some spiritual planet, Goloka Vrindavan, or some inexplicable, inconceivable person called Krishna. But the Vedic literature begins with establishing faith by teaching us what kind of body we have. As I mentioned before, in modern society, people have become so much bewildered by the illusory energy that they don't even know what kind of body they have. There was an interview, as I mentioned, in a school in Oregon, the University of Oregon, and one interviewer was asking the students on the campus, would you believe me if this particular interviewer was around 5 feet 10 inches tall, white reporter, around 25 years old. And he was asking the students there, he said that if I told you I was a 6'5" Chinese woman, would you believe me? And the students, most of them said, well, if you feel like that you're a 6'5" Chinese woman, then I guess I'd have to accept it. That's who you are. So people have become so bewildered that even what they see in the mirror, they don't even accept. What to speak of understanding, according to the modes of nature, what kind of body we have, or even according to Ayurveda, what kind of body we're actually inhabiting. If you're riding around in a Volkswagen and you believe that you're a Ferrari, then you're going to be very disappointed. Similarly, if we don't know, or if you're treating a Ferrari like it was a Volkswagen, you also get some problems. Or as I mentioned in one lecture, if you're an elephant, that you should eat like an elephant. And if you're an ant, you should eat like an ant. But if you're actually an ant, and you decide to eat like an elephant, or if you're an elephant and you decide to eat like an ant, you're going to have some problems. So the Vedic literature teaches us how to understand even what kind of body we're in, so we can have the proper diet, the proper lifestyle, the proper work, etc., so that we can be compatible with our psychophysical nature, our activities, our thoughts, our mood, our association. But because people don't know what kind of body they have, or what's actually compatible in terms of diet or association or work, etc., most people are quite frustrated in the present society. They're being taught that you can be whatever you want to be, but no one can be whatever they want to be. Their best thing is to be what they actually are. But when one finds out who they actually are, what kind of body they're inhabiting, and lives according in harmony with that nature, then generally they're healthier, more peaceful, happier, more productive. Similarly, when people understand what they've done in the past, what their present nature is in the present, and what they can expect in the future, then this develops knowledge in the Vedic culture, in the Vedic philosophy, in the Vedic wisdom. And this will help one gradually advance towards confidential knowledge. In other words, for most people, if they hear that their body is changing, but they themselves are a spiritual soul, some people may accept and some people may not understand at all what Krishna is talking about in Bhagavad Gita. But if they gradually advance through the Vedic culture, then gradually this becomes clearer as they go from simply becoming aware of how the material world functions in terms of karma, how the modes of material nature work, how the different elements of the body are created, what's the proper diet for them. As that faith is developed, then gradually they can develop faith in the not only the karma kanda section of the Vedas that deal with those knowledge, but also with the knowledge concerning the transmigration of the self. For instance, in the Vedic culture, when people had faith in the Vedic priests, and the Vedic priests were competent to bestow the desires of those who are willing to sacrifice and perform certain sacrifices, then they realized that the Vedic priests had the power to actually help elevate them to the heavenly planets. And with such knowledge, inherently, there's the idea that if I can go to the heavenly planet, not necessarily in the same body, but in my next lifetime, then obviously there was someone going to the heavenly planets besides the body. And therefore, faith in the eternality of the self was established in that way, that if I'm here on the earth planet now, that if I perform certain sacrifices, perform certain austerities or penances or give in charity, then I might become eligible in my next lifetime to go to the heavenly planets. So inherently in the Vedic culture was this idea of going towards higher and higher elevation, different kinds of material bodies, and ultimately liberation from the material body and appearing simply as a soul in Brahman realization. So this is called confidential knowledge. Practically everyone in the Vedic culture, from Ravana to Hiranyakashipu to Yudhisthira Maharaj, everyone had this understanding. Therefore, even in the kingdom of Ravana, even in the kingdom of Kamsa, even in the kingdom of Hiranyakashipu, there are brahmanas performing Vedic sacrifices because everyone has some knowledge of how the material world actually works. Nowadays, even the most learned scholars have, practically speaking, no knowledge of the self, of the soul, and not even knowledge of how the material world works. And they have some knowledge of how to destroy things, because as one advances in the mode of ignorance, the knowledge of how to destroy may be there also. But it is not considered either materially or spiritually very valuable knowledge. As Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad Gita, that they've advanced to the platform where they have atomic weapons that can kill everyone very quickly. But what is the merit to such an advancement of knowledge? People are going to die anyhow, whether you kill them with an atomic weapon, or they die from old age, or they get run over by a car on the street. Everyone is destined to die. So what is the credit for killing people quicker? In any case, Vedic knowledge, even in its most elementary form of karma kanda or jnana kanda, this is real knowledge, and therefore people will gradually develop faith. And as that faith matures, then it advances towards knowledge of the super soul. That the material universe is not going on accidentally. It is actually going on by superior intelligence. Therefore, Krishna says that Daiviyesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Dharatya Mamevaye Prapadyante Mayam Etam Dharantite. That this material nature is one of my energies working under my control. And it is very difficult to overcome. But those who take shelter of me can easily cross beyond it. In other words, we have a guide within us all the time. eternally. His name is Krishna, but he appears as Paramatma, and he's always giving us direction. If we want direction, how to understand confidential knowledge of the difference between the self and the body, or even knowledge in the material world of how to perform Vedic sacrifices, how to give in charity properly, etc., how to do penance properly. This Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. If we accept that knowledge, then we gradually advance. Or we accept knowledge of Krishna's as the super soul, then we can also take instruction from him within the heart, as the yogis try to do. If we reject Krishna, if we reject the Vedic knowledge, then the only thing that will impel us is the force of our senses and our materialistic desires coming from our mind. And therefore, one is sure eventually to enter into the lower species of life, where there is no direction from the super soul. There can be no understanding by the animals that the planets are moving their orbits because Krishna has put them there. Or that when we eat food, that there's energies of Krishna working throughout the whole body that transform that food from one substance to the next, so that it becomes transformed into the different elements of our body. When the tiger is eating the deer, it is not thinking that this deer is compatible with my doshas, and therefore surely I'll be able to digest it and become stronger. No, tigers, even when the deer eats the grass, it has no idea what's actually going on. It has no idea that due to Krishna's presence as the fire of digestion, what he's eating will become digested and transformed into his body. Only human beings can understand these things. Nowadays, people, even the so-called medical authorities, they have no idea how what we're eating is transformed from one dhatu, it is said, from one system of the body to the next system. Therefore, in modern medical education, there is no information about diet, what is compatible, what's not compatible. There's no information about actually even how the body actually works. They have their own theories about what is going on in the material world, which are different from Krishna, the information he gives us in the Vedic scripture. In any case, when we acknowledge the presence of the super soul in our heart and how he's giving us Vedic wisdom, that's a further advancement. That's called more confidential knowledge. That our free will consists of either taking shelter of the super soul and the knowledge he's giving us through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, so that we live our lives externally when we're conditioned souls. We live our lives in the most healthy way possible, because it's understood that a healthy life is actually conducive for self-realization. It is said that when a person is young, he'll sacrifice his health to get wealth. And then when a person gets older, he'll sacrifice his wealth to get health. So health is an important factor, not the only factor, because in any condition of life, one can actually become Krishna conscious. Still, as much as possible, one should try to remain in the body in the most balanced way possible, so that one is not disturbed, as Prahlad Maharaj said, by the dwindling of the body. Then, at the same time, one should try to utilize the information that the super soul is giving us or as from externally, it is said that the super soul is giving us information through the devotees, telling us how to live life in such a way as we can engage in Krishna's service with enthusiasm. And the more we do that, then the more Krishna gives us that kind of intelligence. How to make further advancement in becoming more steady in our service and becoming more enthusiastic. Now that's our free will. At any moment, we can orientate ourselves towards that conception, taking shelter of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and relying upon the memory of that the super soul can give us to guide our everyday activities. For that reason, we have a sadhana. Just in case we can't exactly remember, but if we have a sadhana every day, then we can chant so many rounds, we can read so many pages, or we can read so much of the scripture, we can serve the devotees by hearing and chanting together, or offering prasadam. We can engage in service regularly every day. And that way, if we concentrate our minds upon the instructions given in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, from Krishna's devotees, from the sadhus, if we concentrate and try to improve our sadhana, then Krishna will give us the intelligence how to do it. Of course, that's voluntarily. If we have certain anarthas that we don't want to give up, then it's very difficult for Krishna to help us very much. If every time we start chanting Hare Krishna, then immediately our mind becomes 10 times more active than it normally is, and we go into Never Never Land, thinking about all our different pastimes in our materialistic life. Then it's very hard for Krishna to give us the intelligence to actually chant Hare Krishna better. He'll tell us, why don't you just listen and just let those thoughts go by? You did this yesterday and it didn't help you very much. So why should you do it today? Why don't you try something new? Why don't you try to chant better, calling out to Srimati Radharani and myself, and just try to listen and let all those thoughts go by and not get disturbed by them. So if we accept that, maybe for one or two mantras, we'll actually be able to listen. And the Maya said, what kind of nonsense are you? Why are you listening to Krishna? You know, you have so many things to think about, worry about. You don't have enough time in the day to worry about all the things you have to do today. So don't worry about chanting Hare Krishna, so attentively. If you chant too attentively, you'll get a heart attack. Relax, think about Maya for a while. And so if we go our 16 rounds with a holy name, like in boxing, they have boxing where they put up their fists and they box for so many rounds. So in the first round against Maya with the holy name is on one side of the ring, Maya is on the other side. And the first round we go out and immediately Maya hits us, whack, and we fall unconscious. Hare Krishna, we're unconscious. We get a knockout in the first round. So luckily there are 16 rounds we have to go through. So we should try to chant attentively, and then Krishna will give us intelligence how to do it better and better and better if we try. If we try to remain detached from the thoughts that are going through our mind, which are disconnected from Krishna, and at the same time, even more important, try to become attached to the instructions given to us to how to chant Hare Krishna without the 10 offenses, attentively and with some feeling. So this is the job of the super soul, is to try to help us improve our devotional service. He's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, eternally with us, trying to get us to practice devotional service and improve it. Now, the job of the super soul is not simply to help us, or the job of the super soul is to help us improve our devotional service, but Krishna is not only the super soul. Krishna's pastimes are not simply giving intelligence to the conditioned souls, either to enjoy sense gratification and animalistic life, or to make progress towards spiritual life. Krishna lives in the spiritual world in his ever blissful, eternal form, all-attractive form, full of 6 opulences, and there he enjoys with his ever-liberated associates. So if we take shelter of the super soul and coming through the instructions of the Guru, Sadhana, Shastra, then gradually it is said in the Bhagavad Gita that after many births and deaths, that one who's not actually knowledge of me surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So if we take shelter of Guru, Sadhana, Shastra, and the super soul within our heart, then gradually, by Krishna's mercy, then our experience of simply chanting the holy name, which we're practicing our sadhana, or reading Prabhupada's books, or serving the deity, gradually Krishna will reveal himself to us, and then we'll realize how sweet the holy name is, how sweet the deities are, how sweet the books are, Srila Prabhupada's books, how sweet it is to associate with the devotees, how sweet it is to live in a spiritual atmosphere, and how sweet it is to distribute Krishna consciousness to others. Now, everything depends simply upon our willingness to try to become 2 things: more steady in our service, and at the same time, less attached to the material world and more attached to the activities of Krishna consciousness. Whereas Krishna says in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samitityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. That one who's engaged in devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. So once we come to the eternal platform, once we're actually on the spiritual platform, then our material senses, our material mind, our material conceptions will no longer disturb us. So this is very important. Now, because we have a material body, and especially a material mind, we're subject to becoming disturbed by them. But by practicing abhyabhicharayena, undeviated devotional service, gradually these disturbances of our senses and mind will go away. And then we can become peacefully situated on the eternal platform and practice devotional service without disturbance. Or in other words, even in the greatest disturbance that's going on externally or even internally, that we won't be disturbed by these things. Probably gives the example of a coconut. If you go to India, or even here probably anywhere, there are many coconuts. And if you shake the coconut, you can't hear anything because the inside of the coconut is attached to the shell of the coconut or the outside of the coconut. The coconut, which is the shell, which has the coconut water, is attached to the fibers of the coconut that's external to it. But in the course of time, when the coconut matures, then the inside, the shell falls out. And when you shake the coconut, you can hear the inside husk. You can hear the inside shell of the coconut. Similarly, being spiritual souls, we're actually different from this material world. But as we practice devotional service and become mature, then gradually the soul will detach itself from the external environment that it's living in, and therefore live peacefully under any material circumstances, like waking up from a dream. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that this knowledge is confidential to know about the soul, even more confidential to know about the super soul, but the most confidential knowledge is pure devotional service. So we're practicing devotional service, but we may still be somewhat attached to the material world. Still by practice, bhakti mam abhijananti, yavanyas chasmi tatvataha, tato mam tatvato gyatva, vishate tad anantara. Still by practicing, not only externally, doing our sadhana, but also try to practice understanding what actually is our situation, so that when we are faced with situations, either pleasant or unpleasant, we don't forget to see them in relation to Krishna. Practicing moving the body, for instance, picking up our beads and chanting, this is easier. It doesn't require extensive control because our minds can wander, our conception can wander, and we can still be chanting. Shnik, shnik, ram, ram, day, 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 day. Hey, kitty, kitty, hey, kitty, kitty. We can go on chanting like that, but actually to focus our attention a little bit, use our intelligence, that's a further step from just using our body. Therefore, these classes, Prabhupada's books, instructions from the devotees, is considered very important. Satam prasangam mama virya samvido. In the association of devotees, we can hear about Krishna's glories, especially the glories of how to improve our devotional service in our present body, with our present body, mind, and intelligence, and how to awaken our determination to improve our devotional service. This determination to improve our devotional service will depend upon our detachment from material sense gratification. What robs our determination to improve our devotional service is our attachment to sense gratification. Just the feeling that I can become happy or satisfied or enjoy through sense gratification robs our intelligence, robs us of our determination to use our intelligence to focus our attention and give our love to Krishna. Therefore, Krishna says, Manmana, we have to hear about what? Madbhakto. We have to hear about what it means to try to become Krishna's devotee. How to practice devotional service in such a way as to actually make progress towards becoming a real devotee of Krishna. As it says, Yesham andikatam papam jananam punya karmanam. When we come to the platform of actually liberation, when we no longer disturbed by the external material, by the internal and external environment, then real devotional service in our lives will begin. But the chanting is so nice that even if we're not liberated, even if we're still attached or suffering the reactions of our past activities, subtly and grossly, still the chanting is so nice that it actually purifies us of these tendency, of these attachments towards the reactions of our past activities. That gradually what's influencing our karma, what's known as papa, bija, prarabdha, and aprarabdha karma. The chanting is so nice that if we try to make some attempt to do it offenselessly, then we'll become purified of these desires for material enjoyment and mental speculation. That devotional service is so nice that even if we execute it for some days and then fall away, there's no loss. Whatever purification we had, whatever advancement we had in Krishna consciousness, that becomes our permanent asset. Still, Krishna expects us that we should take to the process with determination. Yesham antikatam papam, jananam punya karmanam, te dvanva moha nirmuktva, bhujante mam dridavrataha. Dridavrataha. That gradually our desires for material enjoyment will disappear so that we become kataruchi. We actually have a taste for our chanting, a taste for hearing about Krishna, taste for serving Krishna's devotees, taste for devotional service. And that we're no longer affected by our past activities, past material desires and activities. Then our life will become completely successful and we'll understand what it means to actually fully surrender to Krishna and enter into the spiritual kingdom. So therefore, this knowledge is the king of knowledge, because all the other knowledges, whether in the Vedic culture to bring us to liberation, or the materialistic knowledge, cannot save us from birth, death, old age, and disease. As a matter of fact, materialistic knowledge will simply bring us back to birth, death, old age, and disease. Karmic knowledge, which is quite common nowadays, will bring us into a lower species of life or lower form of life, while Vedic knowledge may elevate us to a higher form of life. But only this knowledge of devotional service can actually free us from all material existence, reawaken our spiritual identity, and bring us back to Krishna in the spiritual world. Therefore, it's the king of all confidential knowledge. And it's the purest knowledge, because just by executing it, one becomes pure. Even if one is impure, if he executes this knowledge, this devotional service, then one will become pure. And it gives one direct perception of Krishna eventually, and as Krishna reveals himself, then we realize ourselves also simultaneously. So all knowledge is meant to teach us, all Dharma is meant to teach us that we're servants, and the perfection of service is to engage in Krishna's service. What's that? Agnihotra?
Медленнее.
Okay. Perfection of life is to engage in Krishna's service. That's the perfection of Dharma. Everyone is a servant, just like we have our finger. The finger has no business other than to serve the body. If the finger gets a sweetmeat of rasgulla, it doesn't say, I'm tired of bringing it to the stomach all the time. I think I'm just going to try and eat it myself. No, the finger knows that if I'm going to be happy with this rasgulla, I better pick it up and give it to the stomach. And when the stomach's satisfied, then I'll also be satisfied. Similarly, unless we understand that our Dharma is to serve Krishna, we can never be happy. If we try to enjoy outside of bringing the food and our service to Krishna, then we're just like the finger trying to enjoy the rasgulla independently of bringing it to the stomach. Or as it says in the Bhagavatam, Itatura mula nishechanena triptyanti tatskanda bujo prashaka pranahara chaya tendriyanam tataiva sarahanam atiteja. Just like when we water the root of the tree, then the water naturally goes to all the leaves and branches. And when we supply food to the stomach, then naturally it goes to all the different parts of the body. So when we serve Achyuta, Krishna, then naturally not only ourselves, but all the demigods will become satisfied. Therefore, it's the king of all service. It's perfection of service. That is to understand that our real business is to serve Krishna. And it's joyfully performed. We don't have to break bricks. We don't have to scale mountains. We don't have to make millions of dollars. The process is so simple. We just have to chant, dance, and take prasadam, and we can arrive at the highest perfection of life. If chanting, dancing, and taking prasadam is too difficult for us, then we're very unfortunate. Krishna has made it simply joyful. So we should not be attached to being morose and engage in activities that make us morose. We should engage in activities that will actually make us joyful, and that's all we're required to do and to reach the perfection of life. So thank you, Sparsiva. Thank you all. Gracias. Are there any questions? Yes. Okay.
First question, Mataji Langalata, second translate, and I read my question. What is the balance between shiksha and diksha in the spiritual life of the devotee?
There is one knowledge. That knowledge is Krishna, the knowledge coming from Krishna. But as Krishna told Sudama Vipra, that there are two representatives of Krishna, one known as the Diksha Guru and the Shiksha Guru. Both of the, as Krishna says, what is that? Shiksha Guru, ye Krishnaras Rup, Antaryami, Bhakti Shrestha, Eduri Rup. That's Chaitanya Charitamrita 140, Adi Leela 147. Now, once you know the Shiksha Guru as my very self, that as the super soul within the heart, Antaryami, and as the Shiksha Guru, the best of the devotees, that I deliver the souls. Shiksha Guru A, Krishnaras Rup, Antaryami, Bhakti Shrestha, Eduri Rup. They're both the same. Now, the difference is that the Diksha Guru generally gives the mantras and the instructions how to chant the mantras. The idea being that the mantra is Krishna. And everything is contained within the mantra, all Vedic knowledge. Now, how to chant the mantra, the instructions, because the Diksha Guru is generally one of the Shiksha Gurus, and the Shiksha Gurus are also representatives of Krishna. So part of that knowledge is how to come to the spiritual platform by chanting the mantra. That requires practical activities. One of them is how to love Krishna, Ishvara. The second is how to serve Krishna in the association of his devotees. Ishvari tad adineshu, polisheshu dvitsasucha, prema maitri kripo peka, yet kuroti samadhimaha. So how to serve Krishna, who's manifested as the devotees, how to love them and serve them also. And how to serve the innocent, the Balishu, in such a way as to make them devotees, and how to avoid the atheists so that the atheists do not interfere with the Hare Krishna movement. So this knowledge is what the spiritual masters are imparting. Now the initiating guru, he gives the knowledge in the form of the mantra, as well as the instructions, because he's one of the instructing gurus, how to properly see all the other devotees on what level of spiritual attainment they're on, so that one can serve them appropriately. For those who are more advanced than his disciple or follower, he gives them instructions how to serve them and follow them, how to follow their instructions, see their good example, follow the good example of others, and how to serve them appropriately. For those who are on the same level as their disciples or followers, then the initiating guru gives instructions how to cooperate with them so that they could serve the instructions of the higher authorities. And for those who are lower than their disciples or followers, the spiritual master gives instructions how to serve them in such a way as to help raise them to the platform of devotional service. Now, when the disciples are understanding who's on a higher level than they are, not only their initiating guru, but anyone who's more steadily engaged in devotional service than they are, who's serving Krishna with more enthusiasm, who appreciates the devotees more than they do, and accepts them properly as their guide, as a representative of Krishna, and develops a loving relationship with them through service, then they appreciate that they're initiating, that this devotee's initiating guru is actually properly giving them the right instructions and training them up properly. And so such shiksha gurus encourage their disciples to serve their diksha guru even more, with more faith and more steadily. And when the diksha guru sees that the shiksha gurus are properly encouraging their disciples and followers to serve them with more faith, then they encourage their disciples to serve their shiksha gurus even more strongly and more steadily, with more enthusiasm. And when the innocent people see the good qualities developing in the preachers, because they're serving both their shiksha and diksha gurus, therefore they more easily become feeling that they're part of a spiritual family, and they become integrated more easily into the spiritual family of shiksha and diksha gurus. And then we can actually see in a practical way how diksha and shiksha are non-different. But if this initiating gurus or even the shiksha gurus do not properly understand these loving exchanges amongst the devotees, offering gifts in charity, accepting charitable gifts, revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidential, accepting prasad and offering prasad, and do not teach their followers to appropriately engage in loving exchanges with others with these 6 loving exchanges, then the result is that the devotees who actually have shiksha gurus become offensive towards them, and even offensive towards the innocent, or even the shiksha gurus, they become offensive towards the initiating gurus, and their disciples become offensive. And instead of getting a spiritual family, we get problems. We get divisions within the society, groupism, etc., and the actual knowledge, which is loving exchanges, is lost. And instead of growing loving exchanges, we get a growing false egos. Does that answer your question? Anything else?
And the question from Lalita Sundari Devidasi in chat. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11:13-25.
Hold on 1 second. You bring everything. Yes. I'll just finish. Yes, go ahead.
Very quickly. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11:13-25, Krishna says the material mind and the objects of the senses are merely the outer shells of the soul. Does this mean that the mind is not needed by the soul? And how do I make sure that the objects of the senses do not penetrate the mind?
Come on. The soul has a spiritual body, and that body has a spiritual mind, intelligence, and ego. But it's now covered by external material energy, which is similar but different from the soul. The soul has now is covered by material body and a subtle body made out of mind, intelligence, and false ego. But the soul does not need neither the material gross material body nor the material mind, intelligence, and false ego. Those things will, when the soul leaves the body, leaves the material world, he leaves simply in his spiritual body without the material coverings, either gross or subtle. Just like sometimes we have spiritual thoughts. So those spiritual thoughts are actually coming to us. And when we identify ourselves with those spiritual thoughts, it's the spiritual mind that's identifying itself with those spiritual thoughts. And when we have material thoughts, then the soul becomes confused and it becomes bewildered. And it forgets its actual spiritual mind, intelligence, and identity. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Gita ki jai, Gaur Premanande.